After 3 days of Formula One testing in Bahrain, we can start to get a real picture of the 2023 crop of Formula One cars and the trends that there are up and down the grid, starting with the Red Bull and its almost unique pull rod front suspension, almost. And it's one of those things you're going to be seeing quite a lot of. The developments of the cars as they come on are not something we're really going to start to see until the season gets going. Red Bull, they've still got quite a lot of work to do, but the car does look incredibly fast at this point. However, testing does sometimes mislead as to who's good and who isn't so good. Reliability is one of those trends. A lot of teams are struggling for reliability at the test, and we've started to see teams, Red Bull had a little bit of a struggle yesterday, but generally have looked quite good. But other details of the cars have been going quite nicely. The car overall that has looked the most together is this car, the Ferrari. Now, Ferrari have looked really strong with this new car, and this car is an iteration of the F1 75 that raced in 2022. And one of its big trends of that car was the Sidepod design. Everybody talks about it, there's a huge amount of content about that design. Well, that shape is something we're going to be seeing up and down the pit lane. So that's the first of my big 2023 trends to watch, is that Sidepod shape on the Ferrari. You won't just see it on the side pods of other cars, you are going to see it in other areas of the car as well. And that big shape there, that big scalloping, that's something that I think we really are going to have to take a close look at and where it appears on other cars. Look around the front suspension. We get a nice look here at the front suspension of the Ferrari. You can see that push rod front suspension. And why we call it push rod? Well, you can see the internal components, the torsion bars, the separated springing and damping mediums, or the shock absorbers if you want to use that terminology. They are being pushed by the movement of the front wheel. So that's the push rod front suspension layout. The other area of the front wings that we're going to be looking at, we spoke about on day one, those slot gap separators that Ferrari are using. That's a big trend as well, but we're going to talk a little bit more about front wings as we work down the pit lane. So for me, developments are iterative this year. There's no massive, big Mercedes 2022 style zero side pod introduction. There's no great innovation. But one great innovation, they often say there's no silver bullets in Formula One. And this is a great example of it, because actually we're not looking for a single big innovation. We're simply looking for all of those tiny little marginal gains adding up. And at risk of sounding like Dave Brailsford, the Team Sky team boss from cycling, well, those marginal gains do add up to victory. And that's what we're going to be looking at up and down the grid all the way through the season. As I mentioned before, reliability has been a real watchword up and down the grid in testing. And the McLaren team, they haven't had big reliability problems, but they have had lots of little troubles. And it only takes a little thing to stop your car working particularly well. Come with me, we'll take a close look at some where they've been struggling. You can see it quite clearly here around the front wing, the front brake duct extensions. You can just see where they've had to really quite crudely bolt in a strengthening plate to stop those wheel brows, as some people call them, snapping off as the car goes over vibrations, runs over curbs. The team have said, look, this is a minor problem, it's a structural issue, but we've got stronger bits on the way for the Grand Prix. So it shouldn't be an issue for the race, but little problems like that will stop a team like McLaren discovering other more serious problems that you may hope to find during testing. And that's going to hold them back a little bit. And both sides of the car have been fixed up this way. They're going to have to come up with those new parts in time for the Grand Prix. And that may be a little bit heavier. And that's moving us on to the next topic, weight. Weight is a big topic up and down the pit lane, and teams are looking to save significant weight on their car. I was talking to the technical director of the Alpine team earlier on, and he was telling me that that team had to sacrifice weight saving on the 2022 car in order to make the 2023 car meet the weight limit and that mandated weight distribution window. And that's why you're seeing so many teams lifting the paint off their cars and trying to get down to that limit. Because the power units, it's not been talked about much, but the power units have to be 1 kilogram heavier than they were last year. And that 1 kilogram may not sound like very much, but it's in a specific location in the car. Well, some of the teams are countering that by moving some of the weight right to the very tip of the car. Inside this nose cone of the AlphaTauri car is the driver's drink system. It's a small, flat drink packet. It's probably about a litre in capacity. That's located just down here inside the front impact structure and is partly cooled by this little cooling duct here. Now, the cooling duct at the tip of the nose cools the driver and his drink system, but the design of that duct, as we talked about, has been really heavily influenced by Ferrari, who introduced that NACA-style nose-tip duct last season on the F175. And I think that car, I do keep mentioning it, is going to go down as one of the most influential designs of this era of Formula One car, which is going to take us right up to the end of the 2025 season. But the front wings. Front wing design is going to be a big topic. Now, last year we were talking quite a lot about the front wing end plates and how much freedom there was. We sort of expected to see some engineering around the leading edge of the wings, and you are seeing that on some of the cars, some different designs. Alpine have a lumpy, bumpy front wing that Haas introduced last year. Interestingly, though, Haas have moved away from that concept for 2023, but other teams are still playing with that idea. The other areas we were seeing, Haas again played around quite significantly with the strake, the single dive plane you're allowed on the outside of the front wing end plate. Well, again, a few other teams tried it. There's still a few different shapes on display. This typical upsweep. Some teams like Williams have an S shape. But that's sort of an area that's calmed down in terms of development stakes. The real interest, of course, is on the inner fence of the front wings. And the areas I'm really expecting to see a lot of development are just down here. Behind, a lot of people will get this confused. This little sticky outy bit here is a sensor housing that looks back at the front tyre. It looks at what the tyre temperatures are and let the engineers see what's going on. But in this little region, and I'll come around this side, in this little region here, there's a little zone of freedom that two teams have discovered. AlphaTauri haven't exploited it yet, but I would expect them to, like all teams, to do so as the season goes on. You can put a couple of little winglets here on the inner face of the front wing. So far, only the Haas team and the Mercedes team have taken advantage of that. The other area you're going to see a lot of teams exploiting is the linkage between the upper wing elements and the end fence of the wing itself. These were supposed to be purely blended in by the regulations when they were introduced in 2022, but there is some leeway in those rules to do some clever things down there. Alfa Romeo are trying something quite similar to Mercedes, though a little bit less refined. You are going to see other teams trying stuff in this area. So the front wings are a big topic of conversation. But if we have a look back at the front end here of the AlphaTauri, which is nicely stripped down for us, and we can have a nice good look at the front suspension system of that. Another big trend that you're not going to hear talked about very much, but is a really important trend, is the relocation of some of the suspension components around the car. AlphaTauri have got their steering rack quite low in the front bulkhead. A lot of teams are doing that, lowering that center of gravity. Again, we're talking about where you're going to be putting the weight of the car. And then as you look round to the back of the car, can't get the best view, and they don't really want us to take too close a look, but we're going to anyway. You can see the Honda power unit in the back of this car. The power unit freeze is in full effect. However, if you blew up a lot of power units last year, you still had some leeway to do power unit reliability development over the winter. And every single power unit manufacturer has done that, and we're going to go into a bit more detail about that as the season goes on. However, the Honda power unit on display here is still reputed to be the most powerful in the pit lane, though Ferrari may be coming closer to them on that one. We are expecting to see very high top speeds from this car, like we are from Red Bull as well. Again, a repeat of 2022. But the biggest trend, I think, that you are going to see is a little thin piece of wire. And these little thin pieces of wire are starting to pop up all over Formula One cars up and down the grid. AlphaTauri have one here, just behind the N of the Orlen logo on the side of the floor of the car. And you can see that little wire linking the bottom of that red Orlen logo, just linking the edge of the floor all the way underneath that Honda Formula Dream program, all the way back to the leading edge of the, what I like to call the viaduct section of the floor. What those little wires are all about, Mercedes introduced them last year, and then loads of teams are using them in different parts of the car. They're all about making sure the car meets the dimensional legality regulations. And that's a really crucial thing. So the rules must state the bodywork must meet these parts and not be interrupted. Well, That's what the wire is doing. The wire is where the rules say the bodywork must limit, but the bodywork itself obviously doesn't reach where the wire is, so they're using the wire to say, no, look, this is bodywork, it's just a piece of wire, and there's nothing in the rules that say bodywork must be a bit of black carbon fibre. Sure, a bit of wire is in the rules. One of the other things that I think is going to be a big takeaway from this pre-season testing, but also you're going to see the effects of all year long, is the unexpected. Teams that you thought were the underdog will actually become a lot more competitive because of the joint impacts of the cost cap and the aerodynamic testing restrictions. And one of the teams that look to be taking real advantage out of that is the Williams team. Their brand new car, the FW45 here, in pieces next to us, is looking extremely strong and really quite competent as the test has gone on. But one of the things about the FW45 is it shows one of three very distinct styles of side pod that are being used up and down the grid this year. You have the Williams, which is sort of following the line of the Red Bull style side pod and has sort of been ached up and down by a few teams, well, the majority of teams actually, up and down the pit lane. But then you have the Ferrari style of side pod, which is being mimicked by a number of teams, including Aston Martin, to a really extreme degree, as well as Haas, as expected, as well as the Works Ferrari team. And then on their own, as ever, you have Mercedes doing absolutely their own thing. Everybody is looking pretty much everywhere at all of the details on all of the different cars. What works and what doesn't will only really be clear when qualifying gets underway for the Bahrain Grand Prix.